Good morning, everyone. My name is Fred Ranciere, and I have the pleasure of chairing the City of Columbus Citizens Commission on elected official compensation. And I will open up by first apologizing to the Commission for my absence at our first organizational meeting. I got my dates a little mixed up, but happy to serve and looking forward to our deliberations. For the record, I suppose we should introduce ourselves. Who's in the room here with us today? So let's go this way. Bob?
Okay, I'm Bob Weiler with Robert Weiler Company.
Diana Gavan, Dinsmore and Scholl.
Kiana Williams, Ohio Health.
I'm Bill Lafayette, I own Regional.
Joellen Klein, I serve as legal analyst and ethics officer for the Columbus City Council.
Greg Beaverson, compensation manager for the City of Columbus.
Adam Friedman, senior policy advisor for the Office of the Mayor.
We have Joel Diaz on the phone who will be listening in. And Joel, before coming on the phone, I sought clarification. I do not believe we'll be making any decisions today, but should you have questions, you're welcome to interject and ask whatever questions you may have. And then we have someone in the back here, if you may.
Hi, I'm Lauren Herdrick. I work for Fred, a compensation analyst for the City of Columbus.
Okay. So, unless there is reason, let's get right into the agenda. And we have with us Bill Lafayette from Regionomics, who will. I'm going to make a little change here to accommodate Bill's schedule, but we will hear first from him about consumer price index calculations and the considerations that we will need to make as we proceed in our discharge of our responsibilities. So, Bill?
Thank you, sir. I certainly ask your indulgence to allow me to sit through this. I'm just getting over a nasty attack of gout, so it's not comfortable to stand. The city charter ties officials' compensation to the consumer price index, and so what I'm going to do for you is to share some background on the CPI, what it measures, how it's calculated, and which of the thousands of CPIs I would recommend that you use for benchmarking purposes. Now, the CPI is one of a number of alternative ways to measure inflation, which is defined as a process of continuously rising prices, or in other words, continuously declining value of money or purchasing power. So in an inflation situation, the dollar doesn't buy as much as it did before. So the whole point of cost of living increases is to give the worker the same purchasing power that he or she had before the inflation hit. And the CPI is designed to measure inflation and how much the dollar's purchasing power has changed between two specified periods. So the CPI is defined or is constructed by measuring the price of a predefined basket of goods and services at a particular time and place. And to do this, the Bureau of Labor Statistics divides the country into 38 areas, and the CPI is based on the prices of 211 item categories in each of those 38 areas, meaning that they're using 8,118 prices to construct the index. Now, the prices of the item categories are weighted to approximate the purchasing patterns of a typical household. The problem is that many households are not typical households, and purchasing patterns vary widely from one size of household, one type of household to the next. So that in and of itself creates challenges but there's really very little way to overcome that. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys consumers' purchases to figure out what the correct weights in this index ought to be. And the result of that survey is the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is really useful in its own right. You can go into the Consumer Expenditure Survey and figure out how much of an individual household's budget is spent on each of dozens and dozens of different goods and services. Very, very useful survey. So a price index is set to show the path of price changes over time. And so you set the price level of a specific basket of goods, the goods and services that you've specified at a specific date. That's called the base date. You set that to a particular value, which is usually 100, but doesn't necessarily have to be. And it's certainly 100 in the CPI. Now, the date you choose is arbitrary, doesn't matter. The current base for many of the consumer price indexes is a 1982 to 84 average as of now. And the index value in each following month is based on the change in the price of the basket relative to its price at the base month. So say, for example, the price of the basket at the base date is $1,000. Your price index is 100 because that's what you've defined it to be. Say you go back the next month and measure the price of the basket again, and it's 1,002. So you calculate the index as the current month's price divided by the base date times the base value of the index. So in our case, that would be $1,002 divided by $1,000 times 100. So your new price index value is 100.2. Say by the following year, the price of the basket has increased to 1,050. So the index is 1,050 divided by 1,000 times 100, or 105. So in other words, you need $1,050 to get the same things that 1,000 got you the year before. So how does that relate to the inflation rate? The inflation rate, it turns out, is very easy to calculate from the CPI. You typically measure inflation from one year to the next or from 1 month to the next. And if you're measuring from 1 month to the next, often you'll convert that to an annualized rate, but you don't really have to. So you calculate inflation. Oh, skipped one. You calculate, where'd it go? Okay, there it is. I'm sorry. You calculate inflation as the percentage change in the price index between the first and second date. So it's the CPI at the later date minus the CPI at the earlier date divided by the CPI at the earlier date, which reduces to the CPI at the second date over that at the first date minus 1. So I have a little example for you here. I pulled CPI values as of June 2016, 2017, and 2018. The June 2018 value is the most recent. So if you calculate the inflation rate from June 2016 to 2017, you take 244.955 divided by 241.018 minus 1, which gives you an inflation rate of 1.6%. If you do the same thing going from June 2017 to 18, you get an inflation rate of 2.9%. So any questions so far? That makes sense? So you can also calculate an average CPI, or an average inflation rate for a year, by using the average CPI values for the entire year, which I'll show you in a moment. So it turns out that there are 10,614 different CPIs. And they fall into several major groups. The type of consumer is one major division. There are two major different categories of consumer price indexes based on the type of consumers. There's the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, which is the CPI-U, and then the Consumer Price Index for urban wage and clerical workers, which is CPI-W. Usually people use the CPI-U. The difference is simply the weighting of the items in the basket. The CPI-W would be used presumably for a lower wage worker. They can also be categorized, CPIs can be categorized according to the breadth of the basket. There is a CPI for all items, and then a variety of them for various subsets of the basket. So you can get different general groups of goods or services. For example, the CPI for food, energy, services, healthcare, on and on and on, and then a very large number of very specific items. For example, men's pants and shorts has a CPI. Or you can get CPIs excluding groups of items. And the most common and the most important excluding CPI is the CPI of all items less food and energy. And that's called the core CPI. And the idea behind setting up the core CPI is that the prices of food and energy are especially volatile. So if you remove those items, you remove some of the noise in the CPI from one month to the next so that you can see the underlying trend, the base trend of inflation. You also have categories of CPIs that are seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted. Seasonal adjustment takes account of price changes that recur regularly from one month to the next every year. One example of that is the price increase that you typically see in gasoline in late spring when refiners convert from their winter blend to their summer blend, which is more expensive. Gasoline price increases at that point mean less than they do at other times during the year, and what seasonal adjustment does is it pulls out the component of any price increase at that month that's presumably based on that shift from the winter blend to the summer blend. And seasonal adjustment is simply a statistical technique that removes those impacts. You also have CPIs that vary according to their geographical coverage. There is one for all U.S. cities. There's a series for broad regions of the country, the Northeast, the Midwest, the South, and the West, and then 25 metro areas, one of which is not Columbus. You can also get CPIs according to the size of the metro area. There's size A, which is 1.5 million or more, which would certainly apply to Columbus, down to size D, which is less than 50,000. And then you have regions intersected with region size. So you get Midwest size A, which I'll show you in a moment. And then you have a series of 28 national level chained CPIs that are designed to address a specific problem with the traditional CPI, and that's the next thing I want to talk about, problems with the CPI, in addition to the one that I've already mentioned, that your experience may vary from that of the typical household. And certainly the CPI for wage earners and clerical workers is a stab at addressing that problem, but kind of a perfunctory stab. A big problem comes about because of changes in the quality of the underlying goods. This would include, the CPI would certainly include a TV, but at some point in the past, in the basket, that TV changed from black and white to color. And at some more recent point, it changed from a TV with a picture tube to one with a flat screen, high definition, 4K, what have you. So the pace of change in technology-dependent goods, such as computers and smartphones and all that sort of thing, is, as you would imagine, even faster than that. So each of these changes was likely to have resulted in a price increase, but households probably wouldn't see it that way because the new good delivers more satisfaction than the old good. You buy the color TV in 1968 because you want to see shows in color and you don't mind paying more for it. So people have experimented with ways to address this problem, this kind of problem, but the fixes have been very difficult to implement, and so none of them ever has been. So it's just a problem that's sitting out there. And that means that you have to be very careful when you're looking at price changes over long periods of time, even 4 years. There is, as I say, no practical way to fix that problem. You just have to be aware of it. Another problem is that purchasing patterns can and do shift over time. Tastes change, new goods appear, and expenditure shares change. That means that the weights on the prices used to calculate the CPI become less relevant over time. They're updated from time to time, but I would argue probably not fast enough. So, and that time period is every 2 years. Substitutions also happen a whole lot more dynamically than that, as the price of goods and services shift from one to another. So, for example, if the price of margarine goes up and the price of butter comes down, people would be expected to shift from margarine to butter. If the prices of movies go up, fewer people go to movies, more of them rent movies at home or go bowling. So the fact that the price of margarine and movies went up influences people's buying patterns, but once the shift has been made, the higher prices of the item that was substituted away from become irrelevant to the consumer. They don't matter anymore because they're not being purchased anymore. And that means that the CPI with a fixed basket overstates the actual financial impact of changing prices on what households are actually experiencing. So the chain CPI that I mentioned a minute ago is a response to the second and third problems, the problem of shifting consumer preferences and shifting baskets. The chain CPI is calculated like the CPI, except the weights on the goods and services change not every 2 years, but every month, based on the results of the monthly consumer expenditure survey. And because it includes the impact of households' attempts to minimize the impact of rising prices, you certainly expect the chain CPI inflation rate to be lower than the rate calculated from the traditional CPI, and it almost always is. So the chain CPI, or the chained inflation rate from June 2016 to June 2017 turns out to be 1.2% rather than the 1.6% that we got up there. The chained inflation rate from June 2017 to 18 is 2.7% rather than 2.9. Now that sounds like a really, really great solution. Turns out that the Simpson-Bowles Commission on Deficit Reduction back in December 2010 recommended the use of the chain CPI in setting Social Security benefits, although it was more because the chain CPI's inflation rate was lower rather than it is a theoretically better measure of price changes, which struck me and strikes me as really kind of sleazy. There is, however, a really serious practical problem with the chain CPI when you're using it to benchmark, and that is the fact that the chain CPI values come out with all the other consumer price index values about 3 weeks after the end of the month that they're measuring. But because the Consumer Expenditure Survey only comes out with a 3-quarter lag, the index values in the chain CPI for the past year or so are preliminary, and they're revised a couple of times before they're final. On the other hand, the traditional CPI values are final when they come out, which is very unusual for statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if you use the chain CPI to set pay levels, you're going to have to need to go back and figure out how to retroactively restate the adjustments that you've already made. So you may be taking dollars out of public officials' pay packets if the CPI was originally overstated. So that's why the chain CPI is really not that often used. And there are a number of different measures of price index in measures of price changes other than the CPI. There's an implicit price deflator from the gross national product, for example. But the CPI really is probably best for this purpose. What I understand is that calculating pay increases are based on a 4-year average. Greg tells me that that may not be absolutely set in stone. I would not do that. I simply would not, because it makes the pay escalation unresponsive to changes in inflation. And it makes it what economists call sticky. Now, I don't know, but it could be possible that you could decide in your deliberations to say, okay, we'll use this year's inflation rate to set next year's pay increase, and then just say right now, well, we're going to measure the CPI then at a specific month each of the following years, and then base pay increases in future years based on that. I don't know whether you can do that or not, but that would be, I think, a relatively ideal solution.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In this regard? If we look back a couple of 2, 3, 4 years, there was almost negative impact on the CPI because interest rates were not being adjusted, and now they are. How is that? How do we look at that in the context of what you just stated?
Well, the purchase price of a home, including the mortgage, I think would be one of the items in the CPI. And so as the mortgage rates rise, you would expect that to have an impact on the CPI.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if you bought your house 5 years ago and or you just refinanced like I did recently and got into a nice 20-year fixed, doesn't bother you at all.
But the trend seemingly is going up.
It is definitely going up. And inflation's going up.
Right. Which may not have been the case
It was
time.
not last time. Inflation was coming down last time. There was one year that we looked at where the inflation rate was actually negative. It was a recent year at the time. But And the real problem is that if inflation increases, the wage adjustments increase more slowly, and the official winds up losing purchasing power. But on the other hand, if inflation declines, the official makes out like a bandit, but the city winds up paying out more in real terms. So it is really nice to have more frequent pay adjustments than once every 4 years. So.
And you just said something that I forgot already, but there isn't instances when we say salaries are adjusted by CPI, we're only talking about upward, not downward.
Well,
I mean,
that's
we don't
up to
take
you.
money from people.
I probably not. Theoretically, I guess you could, but negative inflation rates are fairly rare.
Okay. I just
Yeah,
wanted to-
and I guess if inflation rates become seriously negative, that's going to be the least of your worries, because you'll be in a depression. So the next point I want to raise is which of these 10,614 CPI values should you use? It's certainly better to go with an all items index rather than one that excludes food and energy, which I called earlier the core CPI. Core inflation, as I said, is certainly a whole lot more stable, but in real life, officials really do have to buy food and energy, and so it's unfair to them not to reflect the changes in those prices. The chain CPI is at least theoretically better, but you have to be comfortable with ambiguity and figure out a way to address it. Knowing that the rate for the past year, if you're using a 4-year average, 1/4 of your total wage adjustment is likely to change, either upward or downward. In any case, though, if you're going to do this, you have to set a date on which you go out and retrieve the CPI value, that chain CPI value, to avoid any conflict later on, because those indexes are changing over time. That doesn't matter with the CPIU because, as I said, once it's come out and it doesn't change. So if you're going to use an annual average inflation rate, you have to use the non-seasonally adjusted CPI. In any case, if you're going to measure inflation year over year, even at a particular month, as I did up there, you should also be using the not seasonally adjusted numbers, which those are. As I said earlier, there's no CPI for Columbus, but it turns out that there is one for Cincinnati and one for Cleveland. I absolutely do not recommend that you use those, though, because the demographics and economies of Cincinnati and Cleveland are dramatically different from the demographics and economics of Columbus. Also, it turns out that individual city indices are a whole lot more volatile than regional or national indices, simply because they're measuring a much more narrow set of prices. I usually use the CPI for all urban consumers in the Midwest for large cities, size class A. That's not a perfect approach, but it does incorporate the purchasing behavior of Midwesterners, and it does include Columbus information to a greater extent than the national index does. So I've got an example here of calculating an average inflation rate for the past 4 years, and this uses the large city Midwest index. And so I pulled values, average values for the year 2013 through 2017, and I calculated inflation for each year using the approach I showed you earlier, and I get a 4-year average inflation rate. Oops, I am in the wrong spot. Whoops. Oh, okay. That's not. Ah, there it is. I shifted the two. Even though that says all U.S. cities, that's actually the Midwest. I apologize. The average inflation rate is 0.92%. And it turns out that that is not the best way to calculate an average percentage change. I've got a footnote that shows you a better way. It's a mean, ugly, nasty-looking formula, but it is more accurate, and at least when you have negative inflation rates like you do here, it's probably a better one to use. So you get a 2.9 or a 0.92% inflation rate, which is a whole lot less than the 1.9% that you get in 2017. And remember that the inflation rate for the 12 months ended in June last month was 2.9%. So we're in a period of pretty rapidly increasing inflation. The economics community seems to think that things are going to settle down. They may or they may not. I use also the all U.S. cities size Class A index, even though it's labeled Midwest, and that comes out to an inflation rate of 1.5% rather than 0.9. So that is what I wanted to share. Was that helpful? Any questions, comments? Okay.
All right. Will you be available as we start to narrow the focus of this issue?
I certainly will, and here is my contact info. And you're welcome to call or write, and I'll be happy to help you out however I can, or even
Other
show up
commissioners
again.
much smarter than me understood everything, but I may need help. Yes. But
All
thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so back to our agenda, and I think Greg, you're next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we've done is we've taken the cities that you gave us and we asked them to complete a survey. I would like to get to those survey slides. Oh, okay. But before we do that, Mr. Chairman, you asked that we talk about a couple of what I typically like to talk, or what I typically like to term compensation education, compensation 101, however we want to look at that. Things like when we talk about the term market, what do we mean by market in my profession? And then also, once we set that market, when we look at comparator jobs, when we finally come down to that final amount, where is it in the market? Is it plus or minus so many percentage points? Is it at a certain amount? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? So I just want to take a couple of minutes to discuss that with you. The definition of the market. When we discuss the market is the prevailing salary of a job. And it answers this question: what are employers willing to pay for this job? There are several considerations: level of responsibility, comparable region, local, state, national, number of employees in the organization, population, and so on. Those are just a few examples. Salaries of actual employees are collected and the median is determined. This is the market. Pay ranges are typically arbitrary and are not useful in determining the market. We have found that with elected officials throughout Ohio, throughout the Midwest, throughout the nation, there typically are not pay ranges utilized, from $20 an hour to $60 an hour. There typically is not such a thing. It's typically legislated, like we do here. The median is preferred over the mean or the average. It represents the greater tendency. Just to give an example of the five numbers, the following five numbers, 5, 10, 50, 100, and 100,000, 50 is the median, but 20,033 is the average. So when we have situations where we have an elected official in another city who gets paid a lot in comparison to everybody else, or not very much in comparison to everybody else, it counteracts that. It doesn't knock out those numbers altogether, but it counteracts that so we can get the more true representation or the central tendency for what that salary is. So this is where the median is more representative of the true market. And my apologies, these are just my quick notes. I know you don't have anything in front of you that I'm talking about. It's really just to go over it, but I'm certainly glad to answer any questions that you might have at any point. Once we establish that market, what we do is we talk about a competitive pay range, a market window, so to speak. So when it comes time for comparison, salaries will rarely exactly match that market rate. Therefore, a market window is useful in determining whether a job is at, below, or above market. So for example, if we had a market rate of $50,000 and the comparator salary is $48,000, pardon me, an established market window of, for example, plus or minus 5% would produce acceptable market rates of $47,500 and $52,500. Therefore, the comparator salary of $48,000 would be considered to be within market. So, and I have this issue, not a lot, but sometimes when our employees, when other people ask me about this, well, my pay isn't at this market. Well, it is. Rarely will it be exactly at that market rate that we've established. Organizations can choose to set the width of the market window, but compensation best practice typically falls in the range of plus or minus 5% to plus or minus 10%. So that may be something that you might want to consider when it comes time to set the salaries after we've reviewed all of the data. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope I didn't go through it too fast.
We may review this again at some point,
Certainly,
but.
And at this time, we are ready to go over the actual results of the survey.
So Greg, before you go through that.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, because it's been a while since we met, can you refresh our memory of all the kind of questions that we asked, or does each slide capture all the questions that we asked your team to?
No, Commissioner Williams, it does not. What we captured are the salaries and the per capita in the slides, salary per capita. The rest of what it was captured from the survey is actually in the spreadsheet that you have here.
And that's the survey piece, but I know that as a group that we had asked for some additional kind of data points for you guys to check into. And so are we going to reflect back on those as well?
From the organizations.
Right. So in our first meeting, you had asked us for like a list of things, a list of information that we wanted you all to capture. The survey was one piece
Right.
of that, but then there were some other data points that we had actually asked for as well. So I'm just trying to wrap my mind around all the information.
They would be included in all of this.
It's all in there. Perfect.
Yes, yes. And I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, that's okay.
I wasn't
Thank
quite
you.
sure at first, yes. Okay. So, and I'm turning slides here at the same time. So the first page, and everyone has the document? Okay. First page, we just wanted to produce a table there to show the 24 municipalities we contacted. And we have a column there for the, those who responded and those who did not respond. We started in April, sending the survey out. There were 2 follow-ups, and for a few regional cities, some phone calls to follow up. And that proved fruitful on a couple, but we're still missing a few that we would have liked to have had. Our response rate is 67%, which is very, very good for a survey of any kind, but definitely for a salary survey. Seems to be this time of year, for whatever reason, cities are surveying each other, and it's a busy time of year. So of those 24 municipalities, 16 have responded to the survey. Page 3, this is our first of the charts we have for you. This is the population of the studied municipalities, and you'll find throughout the slides, Columbus will be highlighted in an orange color and labeled, just to give a visual overview. On slide 4, this is the first elected official salary we have. This is the mayor's base salary. And I'll keep repeating that term, base salary. That's what we're essentially reviewing. We do not include what we call total cash compensation. We're just looking at that base salary. In other words, what's in the elected official's bank account when they're paid. So for Columbus, the amount is $186,722. Median base salary, $131,820. Moving on, page 5.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Do we have similar information from 2015?
We do. We have the report from 2015.
Because I would be interested in seeing where that median line might have been then when this was set,
Oh, okay.
See what's in here.
when the current salaries were set. Oh, it might be in the, okay, which I didn't bring. All right, well, if we have it, I can
Okay.
go back.
Yeah, that is it.
May 2015, mayor and city manager base salary. I don't know if we excluded that prior to, but it looked to be 137,616
Was the median.
was the median salary for mayor and city manager.
Okay.
And for the mayor, there will be a few more slides. It's mayor and city manager. Some cities have both, some cities only have one, so we felt it was important to break the data down a little bit more. Okay.
No, thank you.
We also did the numbers for the per capita base salary, which divides the total number of, let's see, the salary into the population. Excuse me, the population into the salary. Thank you. Population into the salary of the elected official. In this case, again, we're on page 5 here, chart 3. For Columbus, it's 30 cents per capita. Median per capita base salary, 25 cents. Page 6, this is where we add the city manager data. And just to point out, The dark bars represent the mayor. The lighter colored bars represent the city manager. For Columbus, the amount is $186,721. The median salary, $156,918.
Am I reading this right, that the city manager of San Antonio is almost 400, or in excess of 400,000?
Yes, sir, you are.
And so all the cities to the left have both a city manager and a mayor, and then to the right, just a mayor.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Right. Gotcha.
And Adam, was this the statistic you just gave us from the last?
This
that it
was, so, we didn't, in flipping through, I didn't really see a mayor's column or mayor presentation, so the number I just quoted, 137,616, would apply to this slide from 2015.
And that's what it was, okay, yeah.
2015.
At some point, it would be really helpful to have an apples-to-apples comparison to this. So what is a city manager, kind of what is that job description compared to the mayor where they're at, where they both exist? Right, because I want to
okay.
be able to understand like what I'm actually comparing. Because
So
you have,
in terms of roles and responsibilities?
exactly.
So typically, in where there's a city manager position, they're the day-to-day executive. The mayor is more ceremonial. I believe Cincinnati incorporates that type of form of government. So in a population like San Antonio, if you look at the data here in your city and population, San Antonio would have 1.5 million people, 2.4 in their MSA. That, you know, I'm sure the correlation of why they pay their city managers so much in compensation is to, you know, it's a large amount of people to provide services for. So that's at least the roles and responsibilities in a basic cursory overview.
Okay.
Okay, page 7. This is the mayor and city manager per capita base salary. Columbus is at 21 cents per capita. Median per capita base salary is 27 cents. Page 8. On to members of council. Council member base salary is $57,741 for Columbus. The median salary is that salary, $57,741. Next page, page 9. Yes.
So in all of these instances, is everybody paid the same? So if I'm a council member and I've been in position for a year versus a council member who's been in position 5 years, in all of these instances, is everybody at the $57,741?
I can confirm that for the city of Columbus, that is, it's the same amount. The amount is set for all members of council, excluding the council president.
Okay.
For the other cities, I don't know.
And that's going to be adjusted by the recent, well, I was going to say levy, but it wasn't a levy.
Yeah.
Right. There's going to be a different salary.
Well, there will be more council members. Right.
But it won't be a flat salary that will cover 9 or 8 plus 1, right? So it'll be the same across the board, or did the
The individual salaries will be the same, there'll be more money going in.
I thought I read there was an adjustment for existing versus new members. I thought I read something like that.
I don't recall that being
Okay.
part of legislation.
All right.
That could be
Skip
incorrect, but I know they're looking at, I know down the agenda here, we're going to be discussing how those additional council members will affect the compensation.
Yes.
Might be a difference between the council members and the president, maybe the council president?
Since I'm operating from memory, I'm
Oh.
afraid to be too assertive on this issue. I thought I read something that created a distinction between these two new appointees from the incumbent, if you will, council members.
Like staggered compensation?
Yeah, it might have been something like that. So, in any event, we'll get to it, I'm sure, before this is over.
Page 9, council member per capita base salary. For Columbus, it's 7 cents per capita. The median per capita base salary is 10 cents. Page 10, we move to council president. For Columbus, $69,451. The median base salary, $76,086. Oh, I should note there's a footnote. For the cities of El Paso, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Charlotte, there is no current council president.
By law or by vacancy?
We're not sure exactly if there's been a change. I did look at 3 years ago when we surveyed all of those cities, and there was an amount for each one of them then.
There was?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
there was. Yes. So we weren't sure if they were vacant or what exactly was happening there. Next page, page 11, council president per capita base salary. For Columbus, it's 8 cents per capita. The median per capita base salary is 11 cents. And the same footnote applies. Next page, page 12. We asked in the survey how many council members there were in each municipality. For Columbus, there are 7. The median number of council members was 11. On page 13, we followed up with that question and looked at the number of residents per council member. For Columbus, the number is 125,596. The median residents per council member, 54,202. On page 14, we move into the city attorney base salary. For Columbus, the salary is $184,600. The median salary is the same, $184,600. Page 15, city attorney per capita base salary. For Columbus, it's 21 cents per capita. And the median per capita base salary is 25 cents. Page 16. This is the city auditor and controller base salary. The amount for Columbus is $184,600. The median salary is $135,373. And just to note, the dark bars are the city auditor, the lighter colored bars are the controller, and it appears El Paso, Memphis, and St. Louis all have controllers and auditors. Oh, excuse me, St. Louis only has a controller.
Okay, what's the difference, going back to job description, what is the distinctions?
We did not have job descriptions in the survey because elected official job descriptions tend to be fairly close. This
Different way.
Okay.
Does the auditor's office encompass the controller in Columbus, at least? Whatever the function is.
Right, there is no controller in Columbus. And I wouldn't want to speculate the differences between the two jobs for you here, but that's certainly information that we can find out for you and bring back to you at the next meeting.
Yeah, because I think the point about the functions is really what we want to get at, right? We want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Greg, going back to your earlier definition of market, so when I think about a mayor or a city council president, city council members, right, like they have a unique market. But when I look at a city attorney or an auditor, you could go a much broader market than a government official. Are you tracking with me here? So for
Yes.
instance, it's an attorney,
Yes, I see
right?
what you mean. Not necessarily an inherently governmental
Exactly.
Job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we look at the market for those types of positions, are we narrow in that market the same as we're looking at the market for the mayor, or are we broader in that market?
No, we're quite narrow,
Okay.
just like we look for in the mayor and council members and so on. The difference there is that certainly the city attorney must be an attorney, but we don't look at the broader level or number of attorneys because the city attorney itself is an elected position and has responsibility that forgive me attorneys in the room, a regular attorney would not have.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see.
But this does offer up a question. As with, and this certainly, and it applies both with the auditor's office and since they're both elected in the city attorney's office. We also want to factor, I assume, quality of candidate. I mean, we wouldn't, I guess it's not a controlling factor, but you certainly want to be able to attract competency because of a very specific and professional responsibility that they're undertaking versus a more politically focused, which I don't want this to be unfair, because there are equivalencies, but, you know, anybody could be a city council member or a mayor. Anybody can't be an auditor or a city attorney. You
Just
see
by
what I'm
nature of
saying? I mean, it's,
qualifications.
yes, and so that has to intersect the purview of our decision-making as we are looking outward. You know, I guess I could be a first-year lawyer making $186,000 a year. That's not how much you would make in a law firm.
Right, like
As a
there's some
first year.
balance in there, right? Like, like these types of jobs are about public service, right? So you don't want the range to be $1 million.
Right.
But because it is a specialized job, I would think that there's probably some potentially broader market that we potentially might look at for jobs where you do have to have a specialized skill set. I mean, that's what we do, right? When I think about my HR
Right.
division, right? Where there is a nuanced skill that we would be looking for. And Greg, I'm preaching to the choir here, but that's what we would do. So here, it just struck me as I wonder if we would do the same in this instance.
Right, and I understand what you're saying. I'm wondering for an elected official how we would control for that.
I wonder how you make it qualitative when it's so subjective to the electorate's desires.
Right.
If the electorate were to choose a first-year law school graduate fresh out the bar.
But we're sitting here representing,
They're-
we are the citizens.
Right.
For this
Right,
particular
so
purpose,
if
we are it.
they, and it also goes into the candidates and office holders' subjectivity of whether they're running for because it's an attractive salary or they're running for other reasons. And I think, how do you qualify those reasons, both in the electorate and both in the candidate's mind? Is it the salary that's driving them? Is it the electorate that says you deserve this based on your experience or what have you?
So I think you price the job for what the job is, right? Like you factor out the fact that it could be a first-year law school graduate versus a 20-year attorney, and you price the job for what the job is.
level
And that's
of
why I say you do
responsibility.
have to factor in that it is a public service job, so you don't want to make it astronomical. But I do just want to, introduce the idea that if there is a specialized skill set, we probably should be thinking about, is there some level of premium that is attached to that? I don't know if it is or not. It's just a question.
Okay.
And I think what both of your comments remind me of a couple years back discussion about judges' salaries and attracting more of business attorneys to the bench and what private firms pay and people that would be interested in public service, but it's such a pay drop. So kind of overall, is it competitive to get, the best people into public service, and maybe keeping that in the back of your mind? Are we in the range where it makes sense for what we're asking this executive to do, and then compared to the rest of the market, are we able to attract the best people with that salary? That's sort of what if you guys would agree with that, I think the broader consideration.
It's exactly for me, it's exactly what the issue is. And yes, there is a value judgment that's been made, that is made, and the judicial it's probably seen even because so many start out with appointments.
Right.
Young appointees may not be if placed on a ballot, I would prefer to see a little more experience. So, but I think we end up being the citizens that have to decide that these are important factors in attracting the right candidates as well. It shouldn't just be a political decision here. I think we ought to be seeking some incentives to get the highest quality individuals as well, so. But that might be across the board. I guess that could be said for everybody. Yeah. Okay, but thank you.
I apologize, Mr. Diaz got dropped from a call.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated.
Do we need to redo the presentation again?
I'm not sure Mr. Diaz is, but they have terrible cell service.
Your call has.
Let me try one more time.
Just off the record, does the city have someone who holds title controller or within the auditor's office?
No, there's no controller for the city of Columbus.
Your call has been.
Let's proceed.
Okay, and I think where we were there, the city auditor and controller base salary, that was page 16. And page 17, the city auditor and controller per capita base salary. For Columbus, 21 cents per capita, and that is also the median, 21 cents. And then we mentioned it, that concludes the slide presentation. But just to bring it back up again, the spreadsheet that you have, this contains the remainder of the questions that were asked for each elected official.
This may be out of the purview of both of your understandings. The variation in the budgets, the general fund as well as capital, on a per capita scale is really out there. I mean, there's a lot of variation in those fund levels. And we're using a per capita, I see, but I wonder what it would look like if we did it by the size of the budgets that we're asking them to administer, and where do we fit in that world as well? Because at the end of the day, that's their job is falling within the, how are the decisions we're going to make impact our budget, one, and two, does this increase responsibilities, diminish responsibilities? But the variations are so huge. The budget sizes.
Right. Mr. Chairman, that was actually part of the second follow-up that we did 3 years ago with the first commission, is we provided the amount as it relates to the general fund budget. I do not believe we did the capital budget, but we are certainly glad to provide that data.
I think it would be just another data point that we could bring into our considerations, but does everybody agree that might be helpful to?
Okay.
In the current spreadsheet, the first page comparison of municipal elected official compensation for mayor, what are we looking at next to population, the budget numbers there? Do we already have that in this longer?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Which column?
The second one to the right after the city, so population, city MSA, then it's budget, general fund, and capital.
Employees, FTE? Is it?
The column right before there, I'm just trying to, what these numbers are. We do have a budget column.
Right, so
And are we looking for, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page, information different than what you have in here now?
I think the chair is just asking for the comparison by the budget.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to looking at per capita, we'll also look at it per the amount of the budget
Okay.
at each individual salary.
And it shifts the cities around, too.
It certainly does.
Which column they end up in, so.
Okay.
It certainly
Yeah, that
does.
makes sense.
What is it? Baltimore with almost 2.5 billion
Right.
general fund. Yeah, of course, that's a city and a county combined, but yes, we'll be happy to put those numbers together.
And so in your initial analysis of the data that you provided to us, so when I just do like a really cursory look at everything that you provided to us, and I'm just looking at, not the per capita slides, but just the general salary slides, at this point, it only looks like the council president stands out as below the median. So did you all do any analysis of the data that you provided to us yet to say what stands out for you?
We have not, Commissioner. We wanted to simply provide the results of the survey in this first meeting where the data was being reviewed, and then anything that the commission would like us to crunch further, so to speak.
That's
We'd
fair.
be happy to do that.
That's fair. In the previous iteration of this council, was did they ask for per capita, or? Like, how did
They
they-
did, yes.
Okay.
Yes, they did ask for per capita.
Okay.
And just to provide some context to this matrix here, Obviously, the cities that responded, we were able to fill in that information. The cities that did not respond, there's obviously certain information that doesn't change, such as form of government, you know, council structure, things of that. Regarding some of their budget or salary information, compiling this data was subject to public information on websites. So please take that with a grain of salt, okay? But accurate to the most of good faith ability. That's it.
That's any other questions or comments? I think this is very helpful in terms of launching our thought patterns. So, all right, moving along. We're now going to have a discussion of the survey. Oh, that's what we just completed. What it means for the future. Okay, this is where we get to issue 3. All right. Yes, I'm very interested in getting some insight and background and planning and all the things that may touch upon considerations we must give. So this is kind of a new step in the whole city council organization, or city government organization. I probably, it could be even broader. And what we should be tracking, I think we get to the year, we are going to be making recommendations into the years of the first new members. Okay, so yes, this becomes pretty important. We're still safe, as I looked at the averages of, as we went through the slides, the averages of council size. We're still probably below on a per capita maybe basis, but nonetheless, from a budgetary point of view, where does this take us? So if anybody will open up on that one?
Chair Rancière, as you all probably know, in 2023, we will add 2 members to City Council under Issue 3. They'll actually take office January 1st of 2024, but they'll be voted on in 2023. So that'll bring us to a total of 9. We are working on projections as to what that could mean for the city council budget going forward, how much that's going to add, because not only do we have to consider base salary, but also their benefits and pensions and all of that. So Matt Erickson from the Legislative Research Office will be here at your next meeting, which is in 10 days, to give us that information on a projection for what adding 2 will mean for city council's budget. But because the commission's recommendations are going to take into account years when we're going to have more council members, it's something that I wanted to give commissioners a chance to ask questions about, should you have any at this meeting, and then we'll go into more detail, and I'll provide you with the language from issue 3 so that you can see it again, because you may not remember it from the ballot. I'll provide that for you on the 26th as well.
So in the prior, I don't want to hog conversation here, so please jump in if you have questions, but to what degree was the size of our council weighted in coming up with any adjustments or salary adjustments or numbers that we have now plugged in? At all? We were a 7-member council. We were smaller than some of our peer cities, many of our peer cities, it appears. Was that part of the calculus in the prior meeting? Does it assume that because we were smaller, they worked harder? I mean, I don't, well, was it part of the calculus or not? But those would be kinds of the things I think we would have to think about. Will they be working any less? Our projected population might offset that question by 2024, but, you know.
I
I can speak to some of the conversation. I was a part of the Charter Review Commission for Council last fall when they made the recommendation. That commission looked at a number of factors in coming up with their recommendation for adding 2 members. You know, they looked into some of the salaries as to whether they're full-time or considered part-time, whether there's outside employment, because they're allowed to hold outside employment. The only person who's not allowed is the mayor, then city attorney and city auditor. You know, going too far with adding 3, 4, 5, 6, just to compete with other cities that have that number, looking at how it would affect representation in the city, adding the costs of physical redesign of city council chambers, going beyond 2, and not knowing where some of these salaries were going to be down the road. They felt 2 was the most appropriate number to recommend. Again, there was a myriad of factors they were looking at when making that recommendation.
Population, was that one?
Population was certainly something they considered, knowing that Columbus was going to be growing and is still growing, and how adding a particular number of council members would, and at what type of representation, you know, whether that's the large, the hybrid, the district, how that would play out as a whole, in totality.
No.
I won't forget my question.
So in that context, are we relieving council members of responsibility by adding 2? And was that part of the discussion?
I think keeping it in the context of, while they're being representative of the districts to which in the primary, they're representing from their electoral base, they're still overall representing the city at large. So it doesn't dilute any of their responsibilities.
Okay, well, the slide said that my numbers will be off a little bit, but each council member, per council member, they have 125,000 constituents.
Sure.
We add 2, that math reduces the number of constituents, I believe, unless the population grows at the same pace.
I would say they'd be accurate, but in terms of they're not beholden to just 125,000. They're beholden to everyone. Correct.
At large.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I can send somebody else to that meeting today. I don't have to go. We got an extra person that could do it. See what I'm saying? I mean, if there's something that collectively as a council, we decided one of its members needs to be present, we now have additional people to discharge, and that'd be just one less meeting for me, so to speak. You know,
I think that's fair. I think the challenge is that we don't know how many meetings are going unattended now because they don't have enough bandwidth to cover everything, right? Because there could.
How much attention they could have, they delivered in the preparation for that meeting.
Either way. But the thing that I think about in the 2 slides, I think show that we're outside of benchmark, right? So we actually need to add, right, to support the city. So it feels like based on these slides, adding the 2 doesn't, for lack of a better word, give relief. It actually just gets us to the standard that we should be at to ensure that the city and constituents are serviced the way that they should be. Mm-hmm. That's what it seems like the slides are telling us.
Well, we're going to have more information on both the changes in law and I suppose the philosophy that went into deciding, making that decision to present to the, you know, I mean, is it just adding 2 because we had pressure from the public? That was part of, obviously, it was a motivator, but at the point in time, we decided to, those of us, those in the city who did this, sat to make a decision, well, how do we address this concern? And we start looking at statistics or information like the information we're looking at and saying, well, probably something needs to be done. Now, how do we do it right? As opposed to emotionally or, and that's kind of where I'm driving this. I'd like to know that, I'd like to think we just didn't make this decision politically, that there was more that went into it that will impact or affect positively or negatively the work and the challenges we're asking council members to address in their day-to-day functions on behalf of the public.
So are there data points that exist that could support that? Understanding?
I can look into I know the charter review definitely put out a summary packet, so I can provide that to the working group to disseminate so that you have background context as to why they made that decision.
Okay.
So the other thing that I think would be helpful too is to understand kind of that tiering that we talked about potentially. So are any of the other cities that we benchmark, do they tier council pay when they come in? So if you've been there 3 years, you get X, so on and so forth. And then, while I do appreciate Adam's kind of summary of the difference between the city manager and the mayor, would just be interested to kind of get an actual job description of the two so that we can really be comparing apples to apples. Because ultimately, if our mayor is essentially functioning as a city manager, then it feels like that data point looks very different when we look at trying to make a decision around salary. So that would be helpful to know.
Well, that's one of the few comments or questions I think I can say with some confidence that our mayor is much more like a city manager than the mayor who's strictly the PR guy, which is basically what you have when you have a city manager. You have a Mr. Outside, that's who the mayor is. Just a comment or two about the salary as we add 2 more city council people. Which is going to take place, as we've said, in about 5 years. And by that time, we have to ask ourselves, we now have 7 council people. By adding 2, that's 2/7 more. Will the population really be growing by close to 2/7 more? Maybe not 2/7, at least 1/7 more, just knowing the trend of what's happening to Columbus. But what I think it comes down to is there's so much data that we can collect. You can almost decide which to rely on and which is less relevant. And I like to think that this is more like an appraiser versus an engineer, and holding myself out as an appraiser for all these years. It's an art, it's not an exact science. And so as much respect as I have for Bill Lafayette and for all these numbers, and I'm not trying to dismiss them, nor say that we should just approximate the numbers. But in the final analysis, it does come down to what do we feel is the most important of all the data we have. And certainly, I was happy to hear the explanation about the CPI, because if we assume that the salaries that were set previously are fair, and were fair, then using the CPI, it seems to me, has great importance. That's not to say that there aren't other things, as, for example, the responsibilities of council may have changed since the last time, and there may be other factors, but certainly I think that's a good starting point for us, because we don't want to, in the final analysis, take a step back and, as they talk about the smell test, hey, here's where we were. We've used the CPI, we made some other adjustments, but it seems to me that's going to be much more defensible than to start picking and choosing which one of these things that we're going to give the greatest weight.
Well, I think ultimately the CPI is the guidepost, and then from there, we're a growing city. We see some cities probably in our survey that are sliding, that might be up here in comparison to us. It's, I think the best data we now have is that we're going to be a bigger city in '24. I think that's our goalpost, right? 2023 or 2024, we're going to be a bigger city than we are going to be now. And are we
That's right.
attracting, what are we doing to be at that level playing field?
Right, and I think that's what reflects on the qualitative value of the city council people we've had up until now.
Right. Right. So, okay. It's all dollars.
It's only money.
All right, so that's the future. We will have someone to discuss a little bit deeper into the results of issue 3. Next scheduled meeting is 10 days from now, as was earlier stated. Anything we need to think about? Is everybody comfortable with the design of the meetings and where we're going with it, or any recommendations or suggestions that might make us more efficient or move us faster?
I'd like to thank the people on the other side of the table here for extensive research you're doing. I think you've answered everything that the commissioners have requested. We appreciate that.
To review, I have on my notes, to get you the rationale for the charter review, recommendations, job descriptions of mayor versus city manager, whether pure councils stagger their pay based on years or experience. Anything else?
I would like to know what happens to this controller. I mean, what is the function of a controller? Why do some cities have both? I can only assume our auditor's performing both, but
We actually were a little surprised at the answer we received. The question is something to the effect of, what is the base salary of your city auditor or controller? And 3 years ago, when we asked that question, we got a response back, and whether it was a city auditor or they just happened to call it a controller, we got that response back. This time, a few cities made a point to say, we have a controller, we call them a controller, we don't call them an auditor, or we actually have both positions. So we found that interesting as well.
In our auditor's office, do we have another person or an assistant or somebody who's performing particular duties that would be similar to what a controller's doing?
No, sir, we don't.
can you help us and help me anyway? What is a controller versus what is an auditor? I don't even know that.
Well, and that's
I
what
don't know
we'll,
if there is a distinction.
that's what we'll find out for you and bring back. I don't want to take that next step and say it's just a difference in terminology, or even speculate that the one pays the bills like a treasurer and the other handles debt service, and I don't want to speculate.
Okay, is there any other information, given the direction we're taking here, is there any other information that would be helpful to any of you that we could now ask for?
I also have in my notes that Greg is going to provide a comparison between salary and percentage of budget for our peer cities.
Yes, I had that too.
All right. So do we still have Joel?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I think he is back online.
Joel?
No questions on my end.
Okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure whether we had you back. So we're going to be convening again on the 26th, which Thursday at 12 p.m., same location?
Yes, it will be the same location.
And
Sounds
then
good. Thank you.
And the other dates to be aware of is the 16th and the 20th. And the goal and objective is that we will conclude our work by the 20th. So we have two more opportunities to seek information that each of you think would be helpful in your individual deliberations in coming up with the recommendation to council.
Did we also have one on the 30th?
I didn't have that
No?
date,
Is
but
that Monday?
Think we need another meeting?
No.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that or not suggesting that. I thought that additionally to beyond the 26th, there was a Monday, the 30th meet. Nope, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Thinking the 20th.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, before you adjourn, I just want to get this in really fast. Commissioner Weiler was kind enough to thank us for the research that we put into it. I want to make a special recognition to Lauren Herdrick, who actually was on the phone, email, back and forth, and actually putting the majority of this data together in the slides. So thank you very much, Lauren. Did a great job. Just wanted to make sure.
The questions to the wrong person.
That's right. Thank you. very
Thank you,
much.
Lauren. And thank everyone. Is there any reason, any other issues? We'll stand adjourned.